Good day, everyone. We are the third reporter, and along with my group mates, we will be discussing the ethics in assessment. I am Bailene Altizo, fourth year AB psychology student, and I will be the first one to talk about the informed consent in assessment. Most assessments and evaluations at some point of this process involve collecting information from individuals. As a psychologist, we should take great care to protect the rights and privacy of these individuals and to ensure that they are treated with respect. Being open and honest about the assessment process is not only ethical, but also establishes trust between you and the participants. This trust in turn helps the process to run smoothly and generates more effective results. Consequently, getting off the right foot by respecting participants' time, privacy, and confidentiality is of utmost importance. Protecting participants' rights includes such things as informing participants about the confidentiality of information and giving participants the ability to withdraw from the evaluation at any time. So the question is, what is informed consent? Informed consent is an agreement or participation made with awareness of significant facts such as the concerns involved or any alternative offered. The framework of informed consent is frequently brought up in discussion of legal ethics and even medical treatments. Informed consent is more than just a form, but it is a process. Information must be presented to participants so that they can voluntarily decide whether or not to participate. The Ethics Code of the American Psychological Association describes informed consent in parts as follows. Psychologists inform participants about the purpose of the research. It also includes the expected duration and the procedures. So here, what is the main goal of the research and how will it takes? Second, their right to decline to participate and to withdraw from the research once the participation has begun. Third will be the foreseeable consequences of declining or withdrawing. Fourth, the reasonably foreseeable factors that may be expected to influence your willingness to participate, such potential risk, discomfort, or even the adverse effects. The fifth is any prospective research benefits. Six will be the limits of the confidentiality. Seven are the incentives for participation. And eight is to whom to contact for questions about the research and research participants' rights. They provide the opportunity for the prospective participants to ask questions and also receive answers. And for informed consent to be considered valid, the participant must be physically or mentally able to make the decisions to participate in research. Person's consent must be given voluntarily without any coercion. Now let's proceed with a case related to informed consent. Before, there were several court cases involving medical procedures that were performed without the patient's permission that set the groundwork for establishing informed consent as a concept for both medical treatment and also research. However, the term informed consent wasn't officially used in court documents until 1957 in the case of Salgo. So Martin Salgo underwent a procedure at the Stanford University Medical Center, and the surgeon injected contrast agent into Salgo's aorta, causing paralysis of his lower limbs. Salgo sued the medical center and the chief surgeon for not informing him before the surgery of the potential risks. So in this case, we can see the risk and also the importance of giving an informed consent to patients and also to our clients, even in medical or other legal procedures. Reference to the ethical principles of psychologists and code of conducts, section 3, Roman relations in the 3.10 informed consent, when a psychologist conduct research or provide assessment, therapy, counseling, or even consulting services in person or electronic transmissions or other forms of communication, they must obtain the informed consent of the individual or individuals using language that is reasonably understandable to the person or persons, except when conducting such activities without consent as mandated by law or governmental regulations or otherwise provided in this ethics code. For persons who are legally incapable of giving informed consent, psychologists nevertheless provide an appropriate explanation or even seek the individual's assent. And these assents are applicable to minors and those individuals who are not competent to give consent, and they were given this assent to take part in the research, and this assent is the agreement of a minor or cognitively impaired adult to participate in a research project. Also, the psychologist considers such persons' preferences and best interest, and also obtain appropriate permission from a legally authorized persons if such substitute consent is permitted or required by law. When consent by a legally authorized person is not permitted or required by law, the psychologists take reasonable steps to protect the individual's rights, and also the individual's welfare. Also, when psychological services are court ordered or otherwise mandated, the psychologist inform the individual of the nature of the anticipated services, including whether the services are court ordered or mandated and any limits of confidentiality before proceeding at the assessment. Also, the psychologist appropriately document written or even oral consent, permissions, and the assent. In the same reference, under the Section 9 assessment, in 9.03, for the informed consent and assessments, a psychologist must obtain informed consent for assessments, evaluations, or diagnostic services as described in the standard in the 3.10 for the informed consent, except when, first, the testing is mandated by law or governmental regulations. So laws and regulations imposed by the government require testing to be carried out. Also, informed consent is implied because testing is conducted as a routine educational or institutional or even organizational activity. Example, when participants voluntarily agree to the assessment when applying for a job. Or lastly, one purpose of the testing is to evaluate decisional capacity. The informed consent includes an explanation of the nature and the purpose of the assessment. It includes the fees, involvement of third parties, and limits of confidentiality and sufficient opportunity for the client or the patient to ask questions and receive answers. When the person to be assessed has questionable capacity to consent, or when the assessment is mandated, the person should be provided with information about the general nature and the purpose of the assessment in reasonably understandable language. Also, when using the services of an interpreter to assess with the assessment of a client, the psychologist must obtain informed consent from the client for use of the interpreter and must ensure the confidentiality of test results and test security are maintained, and must also include in their recommendations the reports and diagnostic or evaluative statements. Let's proceed with the core elements of informed consent in assessment. So first is the nature of the assessment. This refers to the general category of the assessment. So for example, it will assess a person's personality or even a parenting skills or even unemployment skills and also the developmental disabilities. Second, the nature of the process must also uh, consist of the procedures and the testing format. Example, it will be carried on in the oral interviews or even written self-report checklists. And also the duration of the assessment. For example, it will take an hour or even it has to be carried on in a multiple assessment. Next is the purpose of the assessment. This refers to its potential use. For example, in a treatment decisions and a plans for or evaluations or rehabilitations of criminal offenders. Also, it must consist of the fees. The discussion of the fees must include costs of the assessment and payment schedule and should be consistent with requirement of the standards of fees and financial arrangements. And next will be the third parties. So the involvement of third parties refers to other individuals such as the legal guardians, the employers, organizations, or other governing authorities that have requested the assessment and to whom the results of the assessment will be provided. Also, when a psychologist, we must be familiar with ethical standards, the state law, and the federal regulations that is relevant to the appropriate role of third parties and the release of the documents of their such information to others. Also, the confidentiality. So the informed consent to assessment must provide a clear explanation of the extent and limits of confidentiality, including the when a psychologist must comply with reporting requirements such as mandated by child abuse reporting or duty to warn laws. Also, in the case of assessments involving minors, a guardian has an access to the records. So, psychologists who administer assessments over the internet must also inform the clients or the patients or even research participants or others about the procedures that will be used to protect the confidentiality and the threats to confidentiality unique to this form of electronic transmission of information. As a conclusion, meeting ethical requirements is a key element of on research or even evaluation projects and assessments. Planning and developing clear materials for participants, and also ensuring all staffs have a good understanding of the importance of these principles will help ensure that the evaluation and the assessments are conducted ethically. Understanding more about the process is essential whether you are planning to conduct or participate in a psychological assessment. The informed consent is an essential part of ethical research or other legal processes, which means it must be obtained voluntarily and fully informed the participants of anything they need to know before they decide to move forward as part of the assessment or or even researches. If you're concerned about this process when you take part in an experiment or even a study, research, or assessment, understand that it helps protect your rights and well being by ensuring that you are aware of any risk or benefits associated with, with taking part in the study, assessment, or any legal procedure.